Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel on the impact of XR, AI, and emerging technology on journalistic integrity. My name is Melanie Hogue, and by day, I am a content designer at Microsoft, focused on designing AI products, and by night, I am a graduate student under ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, studying narrative and emerging media. So today, I'm here as a student, drawing from my background in immersive journalism, where we often talk about the best practices for leveraging the latest tech and how to maintain journalistic integrity. And if you're in here today, I can imagine you would all agree that this is an important topic in today's era of misinformation. So to help answer some of the questions around this topic, we have with us three distinguished guests. We have Mary Matheson, Adam Rose, and Robert Hernandez. Now, before we dive right into the discussion, I want to ask each of our panelists to give a brief intro so you can all get to know them better and get excited for the talk we have planned ahead. So, Mary, would you like to start?
Okay, so I'm Mary Matheson. I am a professor of narrative and emerging media at Arizona State University, and Mel is one of my brilliant students, and there are lots more of them here. I sort of head up the education part of that program. You might know Nani de la Peña, who coined the term immersive journalism, and she is the program director. So I work alongside Nani and also Riot Yezbik, who's here. You know, we're hugely passionate to train up journalists and creators and artists to use our wonderful technology for a greater purpose. My background is as a journalist. I cut my teeth in Colombia in the 1990s. For those of you who watch Narcos, it's season 2. And that's when I was there, reporting for National Public Radio and Time Magazine, and obviously The Guardian in the UK. I'm British. And then I went on to, from being a radio and print journalist into TV, and in 2016 began working with virtual reality in particular. And I often work alongside nonprofits now to create VR documentaries.
All right, well, my name is Adam Rose. I'm with Starling Lab, where I'm our COO. My background is in journalism, about 20 years with different outlets, and across the media landscape have been with Huffington Post, LA Times, CBS, and LAist, among others. And in my experience with the journalism world, I started to get more into journalist security, realizing that a lot of journalists were being hacked, attacked digitally, things like that. Got interested in cryptography and different information systems, and then started to realize and learn about how they could build authentication and trust, certain things associated with what people hear about with Web 3 or decentralized web. So I joined Starling about 2 years ago, which is an academic research lab co-founded by the Stanford School of Electrical Engineering. So they bring this cryptography experience, blockchain, information theory, and then USC Shoah Foundation, where they do incredible work on genocide research and collect testimonials. So they have really important collections that they need to preserve. You know, these are some of the most denied things on Earth, you know, subject to denialism, and they're also some of the most culturally significant. And so they need to think about not only the provenance and proving that something is real, but the long-term preservation of that. So at Starling, we're very fortunate to get to partner with journalists, legal accountability practitioners, people who investigate and prosecute war crimes, and then historians who are archiving really important work. And so we work to try and bolster trust in their materials through different digital authentication workflows. So looking forward to talking a little bit more about that today.
Hello, I'm Robert Hernandez. I'm a digital journalism professor at USC. It's going to be 15 years, July 1st, which is insane, because I was only going to be there for 2 years. Let's see, so I was sharing earlier, I got hired when Nani de la Peña was hired at USC. I was hired to be a full-time digital professor, the first faculty person that did digital journalism, and Nani was brought in as, I believe, innovation fellow. I have been coming to AWE since 2011. That was my first one, so I missed the first one. and have been almost to every other one since. Watching this industry grow, seeing one other journalist in the conference, seeing that most of the tech was created for tech people and not by content creators, let alone journalists. I've abandoned Twitter and gone to Blue Sky. Hope you do as well. But back then, I was the only one tweeting about AWE, and then I started to meet other nerds and started to connect and see how the barrier of entry to create content has been lowered and cyclical with other technologies. Seeing the announcements this morning for new apps to create WebXR or taking advantage of Niantic's tech. I've been, making partnerships informally in these spaces so I can produce immersive pieces with my students under the name JOVRNALISM. I'm the founder of that, where my students and I collaborate, and we'll show them more projects about that. Trying to democratize this technology so more underrepresented, underserved communities could tell their own stories in these new spaces.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone, for the introductions. So I'd like to dive right in, and then we'll try to save the last 10 or 15 minutes for a Q&A with our audience. So Mary, let's start with you. So I know firsthand that you are always emphasizing sticking to core journalistic principles, like verifying sources and adding various viewpoints, no matter what medium you're working in. So how would you define journalistic integrity in today's media landscape?
So I think we're in a really interesting period, right? When I first started out, obviously for me, you have those basic principles of bearing witness and telling the facts, as well as telling the untold stories. A lot of the kind of work that Robert is doing, I'm sort of very interested in that as well, is how do we uncover the stories that maybe people don't want us to know? How do we question the sort of party line that we might be told? And certainly when I started out, we had to get 3 sources before you could publish anything. Now, in today's citizen journalism, I'm not sure that kind of works anymore. So the question for us then is, how can we use this technology to enhance that fact-finding, let's say? I don't really want to use the word truth because I think that's a very difficult, it's difficult to sort of define it, and that word is used and bandied around quite a lot now. So, how can we kind of use this technology to both create connections and then authenticate? So both Adam and I are going to talk a little bit about that. I've been working with Starling Lab. I'll talk about it in a bit more depth. But I think those essential principles remain the same. And the question is simply, how do we use these tools to tell those stories?
And then, Robert, I'll go to you next and talk a little bit about the tools. So you're also a professor who is consistently integrating cutting-edge technology into your curriculum. What are the latest advancements you've seen in journalism, and how are they transforming the field?
That's a kind of broad question in terms of how you want to measure the stuff. In terms of immersive, I would say there's been cooling off or retrenchment. People have kind of put that back a little bit. AI and the misunderstanding and the grifting that's happening with AI, and a lot of media executives that do not know what AI is, what it's capable of, and what it's not capable of. We're seeing a lot of bad decisions there. So to answer your question about tools, my specialty is trying to democratize, like I said, and really empower journalists and storytellers and communities to tell their own stories without having a budget, right? So I'm at USC. I don't know if you've heard, it's an expensive school, and even though they have really high tuition and bribery money to get you into the school, none of that money trickles down to me. So what I have to do, being a product of the newsroom, is to try to figure out how I can make partnerships to get access to free tools or near free tools, or get cameras on loan or donated. And so what I'm seeing so far at the conference is that new cyclical thing where there's new free software for you to use. Eighth Wall announced their platform this morning for free, followed by Zapper, which I wish it were for free, but it's affordable compared to what used to be a lot of money. So the creation tools are definitely growing. I remember a 360 camera, one at USC. Who remembers the one that was backed by Disney? $100,000. They can't give them away now. Now cameras cost $500 with more than 8K. So the tools are there for people to adopt and to start creating and not have to wait, to spend $3,500 on a headset or something like that. Does that answer the question, I guess?
Yes,
Okay.
you got it. And then, Adam, I'd love to know, I've heard you mention before how emerging tech like AI and blockchain can help enhance transparency in the media. I'd love to know, what are some of the potential benefits and risks of integrating these technologies into journalism, and how can we address them?
Sure. Well, I want to briefly piggyback on something Mary mentioned, which is this idea of truth. And that is, ideally the highest calling of journalism, but it's very difficult now, right? There's a lot of subjective opinion in things and a lot of debate over what that term even means today. So at Starling, what we're really focusing on is what you can trust. We don't tell you something is true or false. We say, look, can you trust that this digital record is real? So when we think about the advent of AI, potentially it means enormous amounts of content creation, potentially infinite content creation. We're not seeing that yet today in VR experiences, but we will. Whenever you look at a photo and you go, oh, that has 6 fingers, like the new Stable Diffusion, it was released like yesterday or the last couple of days, it actually regressed in terms of having too many fingers, right? But the faces look amazing. They look like Jill Greenberg photography, if anyone knows that. She does those amazing portraits. And so this is the worst it's ever going to be. It will only get better. May not be perfect, but it's going to get really darn good. So the risks with AI, we think about, well, maybe it could empower journalists to create, things and displays that may not be otherwise easily accessible. But it can also create false content, something that people refer to not only as misinformation, but I've seen reference to as misexperiences. And in VR, that can be very profound, that it can overcome a concept that you have of something. So what becomes increasingly important is how we authenticate and reconcile that. Cryptography is a very old technology, actually not a new technology. It's been around thousands of years. There's a reason there's something called a Caesar cipher. Well, using cryptography, we can take essentially a fingerprint of files, a digital fingerprint, and it's just about 64 characters long. It's called a hash, for those who are familiar. And so we run this file, it's all ones and zeros through a math program, and you take that fingerprint, and then you can stick it on something like a blockchain. And people got all hyped up about cryptocurrency and NFTs, and probably, I don't know if anyone's talking about that here today, but that kind of went, but the technology was always good. The technology was always there on the utility side, not on the asset and currency side, but on the utility. Do we store things correctly? Do we register things correctly? So blockchains are an amazing distributed ledger, which you cannot change. And so you can take those fingerprints of whether it's a photo or a VR experience and you stick them on a blockchain. And in doing so, like a fingerprint registry, you've created something you can always come back to and always try and verify the most original version. So along with cryptography and blockchains, we're also seeing improved standards throughout the media industry, things like C2PA, which stands for the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. I'm not sure if C2PA is easier to say or the full thing. And they're connected with, say, the Content Authenticity Initiative and a lot of organizations in terms of media organizations, software developers, and hardware manufacturers, household names, Nikon, Canon, Sony, Adobe, Washington Post, BBC. So standards are also a very important part of this technologically, and then using all these different things so we can say, when we have these experiences, that they're authentic in some way. And even if we combine synthetic and authentic experiences and materials, that we are transparent about that. So that's the opportunity of these technologies to authenticate for the audience.
Can I add something related to, only because it happened last week as a really great example. I get contacted by journalists who want to talk about like this misinformation, disinformation, the sky is falling, AI, oh my God. And I remind them that you don't need this cutting edge tech to do that. Did everyone see the Biden footage that he was looking aimlessly on stage? It's just a different angle that cropped out what he was actually looking at. But taking it out of context, traditional media can be used for this type of misinformation and undermining trust. You don't need AI or immersive or XR to sow those seeds of doubt, whether it's printed media to anything else. It's not a new problem, and it's going to get better or worse, depending on your point of view, but it's still active without this tech.
Yeah, so I think that's a great segue into some of the work you guys are doing. And I'd love for you all to walk us through how you've been using some of these technologies. Adam, you talked about authentication already, and then tell us about how it's changed your methodologies as well. And Mary, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. And just, what was super interesting is that as a journalist right now, just sort of piggybacking a bit on what you were saying, Robert, I'm often finding myself reading a story and trying to work out how to get to the bottom of the story. Like it's often one particular point of view that you're seeing, and I think the great challenge for us is how can we use this tech basically to help everybody, not just people making three-dimensional stories. How to kind of let the general public know that they can start using this kind of technology to verify what they're seeing or hearing, or where can they find a different point of view. I'm going to talk about a project that I've just literally been in Ukraine. I was working on a project that was commissioned by a group who are interested in using virtual reality for advocacy, and also basically as testimony for war crimes. There's a really interesting development as well in journalism, which is that with the onset of the International Criminal Court, for many years, you weren't allowed to use journalistic storytelling as evidence because it was deemed to be might just be one particular point of view, or it wouldn't be the full story, let's say. So there are various journalistic projects like the Reckoning Project, who these guys put me in touch with, and they're actually really exploring how to develop journalistic practice so that the work that we produce can actually be used in a court of law, even if that's the International Court of Law, International Criminal Court. So I was asked to make a VR documentary that could stand up in the ICC. And so as part of this, I started working with Starling Lab to explore how I could tell the story without compromising the story, but equally collect some data. So there were kind of 3 or 4 aspects to the story itself. So I was going to be collecting audio interviews. We were protecting the identity of the interviewees for obvious reasons, and secondly, we were going to collect 360 film. We were also going to collect photogrammetry and then using also Gaussian splats. So I'm going to show you a Gaussian splat that was very exciting that we captured when we were there. Starling very kindly recommended this app called Proof Mode. And so basically, how could we try and incorporate this app into the sort of data capture, basically, that we were doing in Ukraine? And the answer is it was really difficult, and some things were great and worked out really, really well, and other things were really difficult. So I really wanted to use Proof Mode to capture the audio of the interviews, and the idea was that we'd capture it at the same time, and then you could authenticate the broadcast quality interview with this one captured through this app. And unfortunately, we had a problem with uploading, because the idea is that you upload from the location, and the data from the location will be encrypted and then saved. So 5G is a little bit intermittent in some places, as we know, so it was very difficult for me to upload it from the actual location. And then it turned out that these were quite long interviews because people were giving testimony. It wasn't actually like a regular interview. I discovered when I was in Ukraine that actually I would ask one question and then people were just talking to me. So it was really, they were still in a traumatic state. They couldn't really do what we would deem as proper interviews. They literally took me through step by step what had happened to them. So often they were about 2 hours long, which, again, the app couldn't really cope with. So we still have it, and we're trying to sort of download the data, but just trying to keep it real for you guys. And then secondly, we were trying to work out how we could authenticate the images for the 360 filming. We used Instapro 2 and a Titan. Actually, this was the most surprisingly effective use, which was, again, that we used proof mode to simply do a 360 shot from the same point as the camera, as the sort of professional camera. And then they were able to upload that because that was like a 30-second clip or whatever. So that worked really, really well. And then the final sort of area that we were exploring was photogrammetry, and we got a specialist camera, or we had a specific camera. Sony's bringing out this C2PA technology or software, and so we managed to, went to great efforts to try and get the correct camera for the team in Ukraine, and sadly, Sony still had that software in beta. They hadn't actually released it yet. So the kind of one area where we really thought we were going to do well, in fact, was the most difficult. So again, we now have to go back to more traditional methods of authentication, where you can use other data, you can use maps to sort of authenticate each of these elements that we've used. But this is kind of just to give you a little taste of what we saw, and I'm still sort of working on this piece, so. I can't show too much yet, but this kind of shows you just one element of the map. So this is in Bucha, which is just north of Kyiv, where there was some particularly bad massacres that took place and torture of civilians, extrajudicial killings, obviously sexual violence as well. So this kind of just gives you a little idea of how the data can be sort of stored and then sent, and then each one of these little elements, and Adam can talk even more about this because this is his area of expertise. Each of these little sort of black dots will have a set of data behind it, telling you the time and location of where this was captured. And then this is just a really, really interesting development. And the challenge for us is going to be how to capture the data for this. And we're kind of working on how to do that at the moment. But this is a Gaussian splat that was captured in 20 minutes using a Sony X0 rig. And this is something that normally, you can look at the fidelity in this is extraordinary. 20 minutes it took to capture that, and the photogrammetry equivalent took 6 hours. So it just gives you a little idea of how exciting that is. And so in terms of authentication, this is difficult, obviously. We're going to have to work out how we can try and authenticate each one of those tiny elements of data. But again, I'm going to let Adam actually explain a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, this is such important work because right now, as Mary mentioned, there are war crimes that we're concerned about in Ukraine and elsewhere around the world. At the same time, we mentioned denialism earlier. Just keep this in mind. 2 of the criminal defendants in the January 6th insurrection had their lawyers argue in front of a judge, trying to say that the social media evidence of videos of their clients committing crimes were likely deepfakes and so shouldn't be introduced as evidence. Elon Musk's lawyers have argued in court that a Tesla crash video might be a deepfake, so you just can't have video evidence anymore. It's something called the liar's dividend. the more people lie and say, well, this could be fake, the more people start to buy into it. So how do you know something is real? So the framework, the Starling framework that we use is a 3-stage approach. You capture, store, and verify. So Mary has described this really important capture stage where not only is she getting the story, which is what's important for journalists, but also additional metadata, verification data that can be used later to help determine things like GPS coordinates, date and time. Was this really when and where it purports to be? And so you can think about the number of topical news stories today. We've worked with, at Starling, incidents where other war crimes, and there are often war crimes that are subject to the most important journalistic work, involved photos that people have denied for 30 years, which were then rescanned and different testimonial videos were paired with them. And so people would say that a photo of a war crime committed in Bijeljina, Bosnia 30 years ago was a modern day photo of a Ukrainian soldier kicking civilians in the head in Crimea. Those are things that we need to overcome. So really need to prove the date and time, the authorship. Sometimes it's licensing. It's going to be really important in this age of AI. So I believe you've, let me grab this here. So let me show you, this is a different example. This is also, though, in a suburb of Kyiv. This is a bombed out apartment building where a muralist, a French muralist who works a lot with Bansky, he had come in afterwards and painted these really marvelous murals. This is photogrammetry rather than Gaussian splatting, but it gives you just a sense of a typical scene that you might see. And perhaps something here might be pertinent later, like, say, the entry and exit holes of munitions, right? That could be something that's really important for an investigation about where a particular shell was launched from. Maybe there's civilian infrastructure that was being targeted, and there are claims about that. So nothing that surprising or unique about this particular scene, other than clearly there had been a bombing of some sort. And then, of course, this marvelous ephemeral art. I'll add that what's so cool about VR experiences is that this building has now been torn down and reconstructed, and life has moved on, but the art persists. And it persists in the way that the artist intended it to be seen. One of these is a war hero, and one of this is a literary hero of Ukraine who's painted here. So in this next image here, this is how we start to think about, well, I'll skip over the store part. That is very important. We need to store materials with integrity. But start to think about how we verify this. Any sort of authentic 3D experience, something based on a real scene, is going to need scanning. So Mary talked about how Gaussian splatting is so much faster than photogrammetry like this, but you still need a lot of photos on some level, at least a few photos. And if you think about Gaussian splatting or NeRFs, the idea now is that AI is able to quickly and beautifully render these real-world scenes. But how do you know it's the real deal? How do you know it's actually what it purports to be? Well, we can inspect the underlying 2D images. And so we've been developing this UX that helps people not only to see the 2D images that you saw floating around there that were used to comprise the scene, but now with the 2D images, we include these certificates of authenticity. And that's what I was referring to earlier. And it's something that I hear referred to as glass-to-glass authentication. So when the light hits the lens of that camera and hits the sensor, it's hashed on device. That's part of the C2PA work that Mary referenced. Much like AI, it's the worse it's going to be. So terrible issues with the Sony camera in the field because the firmware wasn't working. Right now, it's like you can do it on a Leica camera for 10,000 bucks, right? That's not cheap and accessible. And to Robert's point, we need to make this accessible. But that Proof Mode app that Mary talked about, that is free. You can install it on any Android or iOS phone right now. Works for certain use cases better in Android. But Proof Mode is out there. But again, there's certain limitations. So this authentication technology is getting better and better. We take the hashes of that, we stick it on blockchains, we do other sorts of storage on here. I think we used Filecoin and Storage, which are two Web3 decentralized web approaches. And then you can inspect this data. Now, if you think about going on your browser at home when you surf the web, you see a little lock icon. On some level, this is about as sophisticated as most users will be, right? They see a lock icon, they know that their browser session is secure. They see the certificate, they know, okay, a certain information is being attested to by the publisher. But if you're a cryptographer, I don't know how many we have in the room, you can actually drill down into this and inspect the underlying claims, the hashing algorithms used, the material that was produced, and really get a deep understanding on the ones and zeros level of how much trust to put in this. But by including it, we're hoping to help audiences better understand and better trust this material. So I'm going to skip ahead here because we had some backup slides. We weren't sure if the video would be working, so these are just repeats. But again, you can see how when you're in that experience, in a headset or even on a 2D screen, you can fully explore and check out not only the underlying 2D images, but these certificates of authenticity.
I think also, just to add, more and more news outlets are using this kind of technology as part of their investigation. So there was another really interesting article which was a sort of joint venture between Associated Press and Frontline. I don't know if you saw it, about the Bucha massacre, and they literally had photogrammetry scenes where they'd reconstructed what had happened. So again, in terms of trying to reconstruct a particular crime scene, this is being used more and more. But the sort of exciting thing about the technology that you're working with is that it actually breaks down each individual photograph to sort of authenticate that.
To talk about what my students and I have been doing, very micro, right, from the other side of the world in war crimes to, like I said, trying to democratize these things. I work with my students under the name JOVRNALISM. It was a stupid typo that we thought was hilarious. And someone tried to steal it. We had to trademark it. But since 2015, we've gone to South Korea to cover the Winter Olympics. That work got published by NPR. We covered the Trump inauguration and the Women's March, all in Immersive 360. That was published by the New York Times, NPR. We've been doing all these different projects, and inspired by attending this conference, I cornered Snapchat and I told them this idea on a project we were working with about the unhoused. The project got published by Al Jazeera's VR arm called Contrast, and it was about putting immersive cameras in the hands of the unhoused. I had a little bit of money left over from a grant, bought it on my own. By the way, if you have 360 cameras you would like to donate, please. I don't have money, so give it to me and we'll put it to use. In addition to producing really powerful immersive stories, 360 videos, as we know, if we're going to be strict nerds, 360 video is not VR, but I don't care. It's effective storytelling that allows me to distribute across all my communities, regardless whether or not they have an affordable or an expensive headset. So we do 360 videos, but this year in 2018, we had the idea of doing photogrammetry of someone's tent. And so we pitched the idea to Snapchat. Snapchat said, "Professor, we love the idea. It's never going to work. Your photogrammetry tent and whole experience has to be under 4 megabytes. My student figured it out. We were able to create these experiences. This is a video recording of something we did in 2018 of Jennifer's tent. She was at Echo Park. I don't know if we're going to hear any audio, but she welcomes you to her home. And you
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm going to show you how homeless people live here in Echo Park. And we're going to look around at my tent today. So welcome.
So it was the first time we ever did this.
That
Model's
is
not
a
great,
portable charger.
but we were able to make this an
Most,
interactive
homeless
infographic.
people
And what's
have
really
them to
cool
charge their
is you
phone.
could physically
There's no
crouch down
outlet,
and step inside her tent. So you hold presence with her bedroom, kitchen, living room, her home, right? We were able to optimize the model, optimize the audio, and use a platform that is very ephemeral, where you're throwing up a rainbow and hijack it for these types of more serious stories. We then worked with youth in foster care, did a series with them. We've done stuff with partnerships with survivors of domestic abuse, formerly incarcerated folks. And another recent project we did was about the 30th anniversary of the LA riots, the LA uprising. Now, keep in mind, my students weren't alive when this happened 30 years ago. And we prepared by watching different documentaries and the media coverage. And if you don't recall, it was really bad. The media coverage was horrible and blatantly racist. And right before class started, the semester started, I broke out in a cold sweat thinking, what are my students going to produce? What are the stories they're going to tell? Are we going to use this amazing technology to show Black and brown people looting for diapers? Oh my God. But of course, students are amazing, and they came out with a variety of immersive projects. And one of them was to contact photographers from 30 years ago and have them go, we would record audio with them in the locations where they took the photo, and take video, we did 360 video of present day, and then we overlaid the historical photo on top of it, and we made an AR portal with that. This is with Mr. Kang, when you can launch the AR portal. Once you walk through the threshold of the door, Mr. Kang tells you about the photo. Again, this is present day, 360 of a present day, and then when he walks through, he starts talking to you, and then you have a scrubber that could bring the photo from 1992, the past and the present, right? That was just a little, this tech is so easy and simple because the technology has gotten better and better and easier. So we've been trying to find different use cases for that. Like I mentioned, I'm excited about Niantic's platform and the other platforms to see how might we use these types of technologies that might be for gaming, that might be for enterprise and training someone how to fix an air conditioner. How do we hijack these platforms to tell more human stories? Because I think that is the key to this technology. It's not how cool the tech is. It's what you do with that tech. When you spend $3,500 on a headset and you don't have a reason to put it on a second time, that's a lack of apps, of course, but there's a lack of compelling content. And I think journalism is uniquely placed to define that through its own ethics and ability to tell stories effectively and hopefully accurately and ethically.
Amazing. So Robert, you mentioned your passion for empowering underserved and underrepresented communities to tell their own stories. Mary and Adam, you've covered war crimes and how to put the power back into people's hands with authentication. I'd like to know from any of you, in what ways have you found these emerging technologies enhance or challenge our traditional journalistic practices and ethics?
Okay, I'll go. I mean, God, it's revolutionary. It's revolutionized my practice completely. I mean, a bit like Robert, my intention or my interest in being a journalist was to sort of tell the stories that we don't hear normally. And that went from me being, I'm going to give people a voice, to actually understanding that people have got their own voices. If you just give them the technology, they can do it themselves. And that's the most exciting thing to me about this, about immersive storytelling, is that suddenly I kind of went from sort of trying to bring stories of people from other countries or from communities that we don't hear from into a newspaper or a radio broadcast or a TV show. Suddenly I was able to take my audiences into those stories. And that kind of is a really interesting power balance. It was really important that actually people were suddenly able to tell their stories and give you an idea of what their life was like, or the story that they wanted to tell. So certainly, that's just a bit of a taste. There are many, many other reasons that this has been revolutionary for my own practice, but certainly for me, that's like the core of it.
You want to?
Sure. Well, I'll say, the exciting part to me, I mean, it's very similar, where it's the ability to give people an experience. But for me in particular, it's that aspect of being able to trust it, to know that it's legitimate, especially knowing that we're facing this onslaught of generative AI content, which in and of itself isn't bad, right? I mean, it's a tool that can be used for good or bad, and it's perfectly fine that there is synthetic content. We've been editing content forever. Right? Airbrushing has been used for decades, and it was misused by Stalin to take his enemies out of photos that he was in. It's perfectly fine to crop a photo in many cases, or to color correct. We have to, in fact, color correct quite frequently. So the idea that we can ensure that when no one knows what's real, that we can actually say, no, these were the real experiences. And not just for this moment in time. Journalism is the first draft of history, and that oh so important draft that keeps the public informed, but also for the future. so that maybe 20 years from now, people can understand the socioeconomic conditions, the people's experiences living in Echo Park, and be like, this is not the society that we signed up for, and we need to do better. And hopefully in that future 20 years from now, that we don't allow ourselves to repeat the mistakes and fail people the way that we have, whether it's through mental health services, whether it's through housing, whatever the issues might be. We need to understand that, because we'll forget that. And if we can't experience that, it's really important. And with war crimes, it's so important to have accountability to keep that from happening again. And we know there's going to be denialism, certainly, given the aggressor in the Ukrainian conflict. They're going to deny that things are real. So that is what gets me excited about this, is knowing that people can hold on to something not just today, but in the future, and look back and go, okay, yeah, I trust that that's what happened.
I think for me, we're all here because we drank the Kool-Aid. You put on a headset and you can't unexperience that. That has changed the trajectory of your life or your career on how you want to create your business or tell stories. What's exciting and for me, and on top of that, is that we're bringing over journalistically our core values to this new technology. Being ethical, being accurate, being factual, trustworthy, credibility are these cornerstones for journalism. And I really preach to other journalists that we need to be proactive in these spaces so our values are embedded into that, right? Do you want the metaverse, remember that term, to be just full of spam, or do you want it to be something useful and informative and accurate and trustworthy? And in order to really do that, content creators with those values need to be active in those spaces.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little more, Robert. So is there any advice or steps other journalists or content creators can take to ensure ethical decision-making is used in their projects with emerging technology?
Sure, it's an exercise that I encourage all journalists to do, which is just swap out this tech with another and see if it's ethical, right? Would I remove someone from this photo? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And if so, if you have to do that, how do you communicate that to your viewer, reader, participant? That ethical framework is valid with all platforms. And with ethics, there's a lot of case-by-case kind of examinations that you have to decide. I remember the New York Times did an AR piece of Guatemalan volcano mudslide, and there was a truck that was covered by the mudslide lava thing. And on the edges, it looked like rocks, but what it was were mangoes. But they took out the color and the quality of the mangoes to optimize the model. And they had the debate. Is that ethical? I mean, are mangoes important to this scene? And just the fact that we have these conversations at that detailed level, if you're not a journalist, if you've not been in newsrooms, we do have these conversations that I think that spirit, those values, that framework get applied to whatever work you do, whether it's AI or XR or whatever's next.
I was a standards editor in a previous life, and so that's often dealing with ethics. And I was at Huffington Post, and we had just been acquired by AOL, for those who remember that. And it was a very Wild West newsroom meets corporate America, and they said, you guys really need a social media policy. And social media was the new hotness at that point. And so I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And, newspapers and legacy media were putting out like 15, 20-page social media policies about what you can do and not do, and it was pressure on us to come up with something. And so I was like, yeah, no problem, I got it. I sent back an email 5 minutes later, like, social media is a digital extension of real life. Just like 8 words or so, period. And the lawyers were not thrilled because they like much more detailed information. And I said, all right, 3 more words, use your judgment. That is fundamentally the idea. And I love what Robert brought up here, which is that we need to take our existing values and bring them to the fore in all of these technologies. You do not change as a person because the technology changes. Your values do not change, and those are what matter. And so those matter as much for trust as anything else. As much as the work that I do can help you to cryptographically authenticate material, it doesn't mean that the right choices are being made. That depends on the human at all times. There's always a human layer in technology. We can't divorce ourselves from this. So embrace that. Be authentic to yourself, not in the authentic technology sense, but in the value sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start closing off our discussion. And before we open it up to questions from our audience, I'd love to ask our panelists really quickly, what do you hope the audience takes away from our discussion today?
I'd love, especially this audience, to experiment with technology, to see how you can develop it to authenticate and establish a credibility for 3D information that we're gathering. So I'm hoping there's loads of kind of developers here who will take that challenge on. I think these guys have sort of given a really great summary of how to generally make sure that what your storytelling or your story gathering is credible. But I'd love some of the geeky folk to really take on the challenge to help us make sure that our stories are sort of factually correct and that there's a way to authenticate them.
I'll split it into two different groups here. If you are not a journalist, know that this is what journalists really do. Right? So we actually do the thinking about this and teeth gnashing about this and stay up at night and can't sleep because of this and that our stomach is in knots because of this, because we want to get it right. That's what matters for journalists. So know that a lot goes into that. That's what the profession is really about. It's about informing you earnestly and honestly. For those who are journalists, experiment. Yeah, that's exactly it. Mary's exactly right. And we talked about a lot of heavier stuff in this session. I got into journalism. I was covering USC sports, actually. I was covering the Pete Carroll glory years as a sports journalist. And I got to be on the sidelines of things. It was a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun in journalism, too. Have fun with it. Experiment with the tech for serious good things, but also for the art and joy of storytelling.
I would say that you're at an AR conference and you chose, out of all the sessions being offered, to be at one about journalism ethics. That means you care. That means the folks around you have similar values to be content creators and storytellers with that framework. And I really encourage you, this conference is really great. It's still small, though it's gotten bigger, to look around the room and see a possible collaborator, either on stage or sitting next to you, to play with this stuff, to create new standards and advance the technology.
Oh, I think that's great. And on the note of collaboration, now I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. Please raise your hand, and I believe someone will come around with a microphone and help us out. So we have a couple of hands, and we probably have time for one or two questions.
Do you want me to, Mary, here's a microphone.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, so not to use a totally saturated phrase at this, but in the post-truth world, you can provide proof and you can be committed to proof, but if no one is accepting what you're putting forth as truth, how do you break through that sort of intense distrust? How do you express what you need to say in an authentic way so that people actually recognize that?
That's not an easy answer. Yeah. There are a lot of factors. I'll jump in there. There are a lot of factors, because even if you created the best piece, the audience that you might intend for is not engaging with it, right? Engagement in media in any form for journalism has gone down. But the core problem, I think, that there's two. Media literacy, one, through education, and that's being gutted by a movement. But the other is really core to journalism is empathy, to try to understand a person and not talk at a person and not judge a person and not put a person in a box. And under deadline, a lot of journalists do that. They treat that interview as an exchange opposed to a listening opportunity to better understand the community and therefore represent them better and not demonize them one way or another.
There's a spectrum for me from the math, pure applied math, to the psychology side. mathematics, it's not going to change, right? So if you take the cryptography side of the work that we're doing and you go to a professor of electrical engineering at any university in the country, they're going to be able to verify that, right? But is the end audience going to believe it, to your question? And co-sign what Robert said here. I think it's the empathy. And I think that also think about the power of VR storytelling, that it is more evocative in many ways for people, and that it will also break down empathetic walls the other direction to help understand. And so whether you're telling stories in written form or video form or photo form or AR or VR or XR or pick 360, whatever it is, you can tell more powerful stories that are more engaging because of the technologies at this conference. Use that to break through with audiences.
Someone was.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Thank you for a great panel here. I guess we've talked about having watermarks on things that are true. What is your opinion on having watermarks or other flags on content that is AI generated? Is that feasible? And if so, what would be the enforcement of that, or any other kind of mechanism? For example, also enforcing that you can't spoof the verified marks on the cryptographically confirmed photography.
It's an arms race. Let me be very clear about that. Watermarking is an important opportunity, but also it's not a perfect technology at all. I mean, you can crop something out, but then some people who are developing these technologies will say, well, we can do a certain percentage because of assurance, because we can see things in the pixels and the way things are, the gradients that serve as a watermark, even though it's not perceptible to the human eye, and you can run it through processing, and AI is going to jump ahead of that. Right? It will be an arms race, and I don't think it's necessarily winnable. So because of that, I think that when we think about information, it goes downstream, right? And so once it's already downstream, fact checkers do incredible work debunking, but it's an overwhelming challenge. Upstream is where we need to certify more information as best as we can, give it our best shot. And we worry about privacy and surveillance and include all of those things as well, huge sets of conversations. But know that on that upstream side that's why we focus there, because it's the most attainable. When you're debunking and watermarking, how do you label something? It's going to become a matter of what is that last piece of glass that is there before your eye. So is it an OS that's going to control that? Is it a browser? Is it an app? There's a lot of variability and a lot of industry-dependent technology there. That's all I'll say.
I'd say even if you have incredible technology, like I gave that example before of Biden looking like a lost old man, that was real video, just taken slightly out of context. You don't have to fabricate that to still have that approach.
Cheap fake.
Cheap fake.
All right, everyone. It's really exciting to see where the field of journalism is heading today, and it's been a pleasure having you with us. Thank you for your contributions and your questions, and thank you to the panelists so much for sharing with us their knowledge. We hope to see you later today.